Welcome to the recorded version of Seniors and Driving, part of the Family Caregiver Support webinar series brought to you by the American Society on Aging and a generous sponsorship from Home Instead Senior Care.
Today is Lakelyn Hogan. Lakelyn is a strategic partnership representative for Home Instead Senior Care. She holds a graduate certificate in gerontology and is currently working toward a Master of Arts in Social Gerontology. She also holds a Master's in Business Administration, and her undergraduate education focused on marketing and communication studies. Lakelyn has professional experience in the private and public sectors of senior care services. She has worked on special projects for the University of Nebraska-Omaha's Department of Gerontology and the local area agency on aging. She is serving in her second year as the co-chair of the Nebraska State Chapter of the Alzheimer's Association's Dementia Care Conference. Lakelyn has spent several years assisting senior clients and helping their families navigate the senior care continuum. She is passionate about helping others, especially aging adults and their families. And with that, I would like to welcome our presenter for today, Lakelyn Hogan. Thank you for being here again, Lakelyn.
Thanks, Steve. Happy to be here. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. Today's topic of the webinar is one of the most difficult topics that I get asked about, and that is seniors and driving. Before I get started, I'd like for us all to take a moment and reflect on what driving means to you. There are many of you out there where driving is most likely a big part of your daily life. It's probably the way you got to work this morning. It's how you go to the grocery store, to church, to your kids' activities. It's how you go out to dinner. I could go on. And unless you live in a large city with great public transportation, you most likely associate your ability to drive with your independence. And the seniors that we work with every day feel the same way. So we really need to be sensitive to that and be mindful of it when we are working with seniors and talking to them about driving. And we want to make sure we maintain their dignity and respect when we broach this issue. Now, when driving becomes an issue for a senior, unfortunately, there's not a perfect formula for when a senior should cut back on driving or give up their keys entirely. There's not a specific age or combination of health conditions that's a determining factor. It really does vary from person to person. And I really like how expert Ellen Scholes-Davis put it. She says, age has nothing to do with determining the capacity to drive. It does have to do with changes in vision, physical skills, such as the ability to reach, turn, and work the pedals, and cognitive abilities, such as understanding the rules of the road, making quick decisions, and navigating. And Ellen is the coordinator of the Older Drivers Initiative through the American Occupational Therapy Association, and I'm going to refer to her quite a bit throughout this presentation. She is a great resource on this topic. But as professionals in this field, we can provide families guidance on the best way to bring up issues associated with driving and evaluate whether or not their loved one is safe on the road. And if we determine that they aren't safe, we want to be able to provide some alternatives so we don't compromise their independence. So let's get started by looking at the objectives on the next slide. It's my hope for you that by the end of today's webinar, you'll be able to identify potential signs that a senior might be an unsafe driver. I also hope you'll have a better understanding of the common conditions that impact driving. And also, I hope to equip you with some tips on how to reduce the potential for isolation and depression after a senior gives up driving. So let's start first with some statistics on the next slide. In doing research for today's presentation, I learned that seniors represent the fastest growing segment of drivers. That was news to me. And according to the AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety, current projections suggest that 1/4 of all drivers will be over the age of 65 by the year 2025. That's a lot of seniors out there on the road. But although seniors have a crash rate comparable to that of a 20 or 30-year-old driver, they are the most fragile drivers on the road, and because of that, they have a higher death rate per mile than any other group. So this is a significant issue, and I'm so glad you've tuned in to learn more about it today. A survey conducted for Home Instead, Inc. found that in North America, of the seniors that we surveyed, nearly 9 out of 10 of them, or 87% of seniors, reported that they are very or totally independent on having a car and being able to drive. We also found that they appreciate the freedom and independence that driving can provide, and they're just simply used to driving. In addition, Nearly half of the seniors in North America are somewhat concerned about losing their ability to drive, and 25% are extremely or very concerned about losing that ability. And through our research, we learned something unsettling but not surprising, and that is no one is talking to seniors about driving. While nearly one-third of the surveyed seniors said that a recommendation from a family member or friend would make them reconsider driving, most of them being 95% of them, have not had these important conversations. So while people aren't having the conversation, at least they're willing to talk about it if a family member brings it up. So as professionals, we need to be encouraging these types of conversations. And I wanted to add just one last piece of research that I found in a recent Columbia University study. The study concluded that while an unsafe driver could be dangerous on the road, giving up their keys might put that older adult at risk in other ways. For those seniors who stopped driving, their risk for depression almost doubled. So again, we need to be mindful not only of the safety concerns around driving, but the emotional toll that this important decision will have on seniors if they have to stop driving and give up their keys. Our research also helped us to identify some common concerns around driving, and let's take a look at those concerns on the next slide. The first concern was driving at night. 41% of seniors surveyed said they are less comfortable driving at night than they used to be, and that's often the first thing that they give up. I know my grandma, she just turned 80 this year. We've noticed that she has stopped driving so much at night. Or if we invite her to a family gathering that occurs in the evening, she'll say, "Would you mind picking me up on your way out to Aunt Bill or Aunt Ellie and Uncle Bill's house?" So I'm noticing this in my own grandma. So again, 41% of seniors say they're less comfortable driving at night. And some other uncomfortable driving situations that seniors identified included rush hour traffic, highways, and the downtown areas of their communities. Another concern is the impact of a reduction in driving. Just over half of seniors relayed that a reduction in driving also makes them feel a reduction in independence. And 48% of seniors indicated that no longer driving increased their reliance on family and friends. A final concern revolved around the conversation about driving. Again, 95% of seniors we surveyed said that they have not had any conversations around reducing driving or giving that up altogether. Now, this group of seniors was 70 plus. So if we look at the older seniors, those 85 and older, only 1/5 or 18% of those 85 and older had reported having these types of conversations and recommendations from family members. So while as the age of the senior increases, the likelihood of having a conversation is higher, still that number of 18%, that's, in my book, not high enough. So again, we need to be encouraging these conversations. When you think about all of these results, it highlights the importance of family members talking to older adults about having a plan in place for a transition out of driving. And I recently read that seniors would most likely would like to hear from their spouse, family member, or physician about concerns related to driving rather than the police or the DMV. So it's really important that the conversation starts with the family and we don't let it get to a point where authorities need to get involved. So now that we've identified some concerns about seniors, let's talk about some of the misconceptions around driving on the next slide. As we've been talking about, discontinuing driving for many seniors can be a frightening reality. However, there are some definite misconceptions and some of these fears that go along with giving up driving, and they are rooted in falsehood. According to driving experts, there are 4 common misconceptions, and you can see them listed here on the slide. The first is that driving yourself is cheaper than paying for alternative types of transportation. And it doesn't take long to think about the misconception of this idea. When you add up the cost of the vehicle, either a leased vehicle or a purchased vehicle, along with the expenses of insurance, maintenance, and fuel, driving a vehicle can be pretty pricey. And according to Ellen Skold-Zavis, an estimated 20 to 30% of a family's income goes towards transportation. So we need to think of alternatives that could be funded with the cost of owning their own vehicle. Next is the falsehood that driving is more reliable and alternatives to driving are less convenient. And this can be a tough one to refute because, after all, there's a certain spontaneity about getting in your vehicle and going wherever you want. But if you think about it, vehicles are not always reliable, and the same can be said for drivers. As seniors' driving abilities diminish, they may not be able to rely on themselves as much as they used to for transportation. Older adults should feel confident in a bus schedule or driving services that are prearranged to help them get where they need to go. Even before an older adult quits driving, it's recommended that the family test out several different options with the senior to find a good fit for reliability and convenience. Another misconception that I hear all the time is, I can't give up driving. I've been doing it my whole life. Giving up a lifelong driving habit can be terrifying, and an individual's identity may be connected to owning their own vehicle and their ability to drive. And Ellen Scholes Davis recommends that those who give up driving could still carry a picture identification that will help to reinforce the identity that a license had provided them. And if that 68 Mustang convertible is really important to that senior, why sell it? He or she can still polish it, and I'm sure they could find someone to take them on a drive, especially in a hot rod like that. So the final misconception that I hear frequently is, I won't be able to go anywhere or see anyone if I give up driving. And when you think about it, owning and driving a vehicle could be more isolating than many alternatives, because if a senior relies on him or herself and a vehicle, that may, and if their abilities are diminishing, they might not be able to get out as often as they'd like to. So transportation alternatives may open up a whole new world of contacts for family, in terms of families, friend visits, because a lot of times seniors, as their driving abilities diminish, they tend not to drive as far. They tend to stick to places that are nearby that they can take back roads to get to, where they're avoiding highways, interstates. So that might be limiting in terms of the places that they can go. So looking into alternative modes of transportation could expand their social circles. So now that we know the misconceptions, let's jump into the 10 warning signs that should trigger a conversation about driving on the next slide. Sometimes the signs are subtle, and other times they can come to blazing attention. But it's important to remember that we need to collect the facts before making recommendations about a senior's continued driving. And here are some signs that further investigation could be needed. First is kind of obvious, those mysterious dents. If it is a dent that can be explained, it could very well be innocent, and it might not be the individual's fault. And a fender bender can happen to just about anyone. However, if an older adult can't seem to explain what happened, then further investigations may be needed. And next is trouble turning to see when backing up. The issues of aging could compromise mobility. However, certain important movements are needed to drive safely, like looking over the shoulder. Fortunately, newer vehicles with backup cameras could help older adults compensate for some of these issues of aging. Next is confusing the gas and the brake pedals. I'm sure you have heard stories such as a senior driver goes to the garage door or accidentally runs a red light after confusing the gas and brake pedals. And conditions like dementia can lead to this type of mix-up and confusion, which could put the older driver and anyone in their path in danger. If a senior is getting confused about how to operate their vehicle, it could be time to give up the keys, but most certainly a time to talk about alternatives to driving. The fourth warning sign is an increased irritation or agitation when driving. Poor health and the pain of conditions such as arthritis can trigger irritation and agitation, which could lead to poor judgment on the road. And another sign is bad calls on left-hand turns. Turning left can be tricky and dangerous for older adults who are having trouble focusing on the rules of the road. An unsafe left turn could lead to serious accidents and is definitely a cause for concern. So let's look at the remaining 5 warning signs on the next slide. The sixth warning sign is parking difficulties. And this could be parking difficulties including parallel parking or parking halfway up the curb. This could damage the older adult's vehicle as well as those around it. So we need to watch for signs that an individual is having trouble parking. And when I'm talking about these signs, a good suggestion for family members is to go on a drive with the senior. That way they can see how they navigate in a parking situation or in a left-hand turn situation. So that's a great way to suggest to families. You could have the daughter say something like, you know, Mom, I haven't driven with you in a while. Would you mind taking me for a spin? I love your car. Something of that nature. That could help the adult daughter really get a feel for how the senior is driving on the road. And the seventh warning sign is difficulty staying within the lines or within the lanes. Have you ever spotted someone zigzagging along on the road? If it's an older adult, it could be a sign that fatigue or poor eyesight is making it difficult to stay on course. And we're going to talk about how vision affects driving here in a little bit. The eighth warning sign is a delayed reaction and response time. Safe driving depends on quick reaction times. My dad always told me growing up that I need to practice defensive driving. He said it's not you I'm worried about, it's other people. And issues of aging can slow down our response times in those defensive driving situations and could create a situation where an older adult causes an accident or is unable to respond quickly enough to prevent a crash. Number 9 is driving the wrong speed. If the senior is driving too fast for the speed limit or too slow, or if they're driving too fast in poor road conditions such as rain, fog, or snow, these can be indicators that a driver's judgment might be impaired. And then finally, riding the brake. This could be a sign that the driver no longer has confidence in his or her skill. A foot constantly on the brake is also really hard on the vehicle, and this type of driving behavior could warrant further investigation. So again, these are 10 warning signs that are meant to start the conversation around driving with the senior. It's not necessarily a sign that they need to give up the keys right then and there. But now that we know these warning signs, let's look at health conditions that could affect a person's driving. So we'll look at those on the next slide. We've talked a lot about giving up the keys, but the truth is that many seniors can continue to drive safely well into their senior years. However, if they encounter certain conditions, it's likely to put their driving in jeopardy. And you can see 4 significant conditions listed here on the slide. And I'm going to dive deeper in a little bit on each of these. It's important to keep in mind that whether a senior can continue driving or not may come down to the amount of time it takes to make important decisions on the road. And Ellen Scholes-Davis brings up another great point here. She says driving is one of the IADLs, or instrumental activities of daily living, that cannot be modified beyond a certain point. So if we think about this, if our abilities decline, we might, when we're dressing ourselves, it might take us an extra long time to put on our pants, button our shirts, but, we can take our time with it. We can make modifications. Maybe we switch the shirt to a snaps, or we do an elastic waistband. But when you think of driving and the time it takes to react and to make turns, those types of instrumental activities of daily living, they can't be modified to a certain extent. We can't make the other cars around us slow down. So those are some important things to think about when it comes to driving. And if you think about the most important abilities for drivers, they are vision, our physical ability, including reaching, turning, and working pedals, our cognitive abilities, including being able to understand the rules of the road, make decisions, and navigate. And all of these elements can be affected by the chronic disease process. So we're going to take a look here on the next slide at Alzheimer's disease, and that's the first one that was listed here. As we've talked about, cognitive abilities are important to driving, and Alzheimer's disease or other dementias can compromise those abilities. A past client of mine, her name was Jean, she had the beginning stages of Alzheimer's, and she and her sister lived together, but Jean was the one that did all of the driving. And the progression of her disease prompted her son to call home instead to help her transition out of driving. However, Jean was in no way, shape, or form going to give up her car. When I went to meet with her, I learned that she had always been a single woman and had taken great pride in owning her own vehicle. So I advised her son that we slowly started to limit her driving to help maintain her dignity. And Jean agreed that she would only drive places within a mile of her home, such as the grocery store and the dry cleaner. And she could get to both of these by avoiding major roads and intersections. The rest of the transportation was done by a homestead caregiver that drove Jean's car. So she was still able to ride in her prized possession, but she was also getting to her long-distance appointments, the doctor, those types of places, safely. And eventually, Jean really enjoyed having someone else drive her car, and she gave up driving altogether and just let the caregiver take over. So you might have similar stories to this. But any form of dementia can reduce the senior's ability to drive, and because of the nature of the disease and the progression, in some cases the level of understanding in a senior may vary week to week. One week they might be able to function and drive their own vehicle, but a few weeks later, because of the progression of the disease, it might be time to reconsider driving or limiting the driving. And it's not just being forgetful, because we all have days like that, but it's more about what we're forgetting and how we recover from those incidences. For example, I lose my keys all the time, but the fact that I can retrace my steps eventually to find my keys, that's the difference that someone with Alzheimer's might not be able to retrace their steps to find their keys. So little clues like that might be good warning signs to look for. There's also some great warning signs here on the slide, and I got this information from the Alzheimer's Association. Things such as failing to observe traffic signs, making poor decisions when driving at inappropriate speeds, forgetting directions to places that they usually frequented. So those types of signs can help families realize that it's time to have a conversation. So the next condition we're going to look at is age-related macular degeneration, and that's on the next slide. Now this is a condition that specifically affects vision, and it actually affects more than 10 million Americans each and every day. And unfortunately, it is uncurable and is the leading cause of vision loss in seniors. Macular degeneration in the early stages can cause increased blurry or fuzzy vision, kind of like the picture on the screen. I'm sorry if that hurts your eyes, but I did want to give you a good visual. And it also can distort your central vision and can lead to a loss of our sharp vision, which makes it difficult to see road signs, traffic, people walking along the sides of the street or crossing at a crosswalk, and it may affect their ability to drive safely. So if the senior you're working with has macular degeneration and it's causing them problems when they drive, they're most likely aware of it, or someone is going to point it out to that individual. And again, this does not mean that they should give up driving altogether. It just means that an evaluation is needed. And what you can do is ask some critical questions, and I've listed some of those critical questions here on the slide. They mainly refer to questions referring to how comfortable they are driving at different times of the day and in different conditions. Those can be very telling. So make sure if you're working with someone with macular degeneration that you go through these types of questions with them. And there's another condition that affects vision on the next slide, and that's glaucoma. So let's move to the next slide. On the next slide, here we go. Glaucoma is a group of eye conditions that damage the optic nerve, which is vital to good vision. And this damage is often caused by abnormally high pressure in our eyes. And once the nerve damage occurs and visual loss occurs, it's unfortunately permanent. And most people don't notice these blind areas until it's too late and much of the damage has already taken place. And glaucoma usually affects our peripheral vision, the part of our eyesight that lets us see things out of the corner of our eyes. And because it affects the peripheral vision, individuals might not be aware of their vision loss until its more advanced stages when substantial changes in vision have occurred. While driving, individuals with glaucoma might not see other cars, bicyclists, or pedestrians out of the central vision. So if you think about it, when you're driving down the road, we can usually see, oh, there's a bicyclist that's about to cross the street, so I need to stop before I make my right-hand turn. And when you have glaucoma, those types of sight ranges will be affected. So if you're working with someone with glaucoma, there's some essential questions you'll want to ask them, and I had to list them on the next slide because there were so many. So we'll move to the next slide where we have, I apologize, there it is, there we go. Okay, so here's the 6 important questions you might want to have the senior or the family ask the senior and have them review with their loved one. The senior answers yes to any of these questions, you may want to suspend their driving until you can consult a specialist. And if the answers indicate that they may have a problem under certain conditions, such as driving at night or driving in dim light, you might want to suspend their driving under those specific conditions, again, until you can consult a specialist further. So, like we talked about earlier, if a senior with glaucoma is having some difficulties driving at night or maybe driving on a rainy day, those would be good opportunities to limit the senior's driving until you can consult a specialist. It might be a good way to bring up that conversation. So for many people, if they're taking medication for these types of conditions, it could also affect their driving. So we're going to look at medication use on the next slide. And this is a topic that's really important to consider when we talk about driving. According to the AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety, 95% of older adults use medications that could impair their driving. And a doctor always should be consulted about the side effects of the medication that an older adult is taking. And to learn more about this, you can go to letstalkaboutrx.com. Some of the side effects of medications will result because of these disease processes that we've been talking about. And so on letstalkaboutrx.com, it goes into some more great details. But if you notice changes after a senior starts a new medication, you definitely want to consult a physician, especially if it's affecting their driving. Maybe they're feeling a little more dizzy or they're more drowsy than normal. Those are going to create unsafe driving conditions for that individual. And if a senior is taking more than one medication, it's a really good idea to have their medications reconciled on a monthly basis, especially if that senior is having a lot of changes in their medications. Because if their new meds are being introduced to their medication regime, there might be some medication interactions or side effects that could affect their driving. So you definitely can consult your physician or pharmacist. You could also use a service such as Simple Meds, and you can find that at simplemedsrx.com, and they can help with these types of medication reconciliations and compliance issues. And there's an increased risk of changes in a senior's driving ability with the increase of medications. So it depends, again, on the medications, but it is something to be aware of, especially if these changes are coming on all of a sudden or if they come with a new medication change. So again, be mindful of the medications that a senior is taking and how that relates to their driving. So now that we know about the conditions that could affect a person's ability to drive, let's look at some roadblocks that families might face on the next slide. So the first roadblock is the to and from. An AARP study reported that transportation issues are among the most stressful for family caregivers. So for an older adult, it may be that they are now depending on family for transportation. And this could cause a lot of stress on the family, trying to figure out who's going to take mom to the doctor, who's going to get the groceries for mom or take her to the store. Those can create a lot of stressors for family caregivers, especially if the family caregiver is working, if they have kids of their own that they're taking care of. So we need to make sure that families know that there are other resources available out there to help get their loved ones to and from where they need to go and where they want to go. So the local area agency on aging in your community will most likely have some sort of ride service for seniors. You could also hire a home care agency to provide transportation, or you could ask other family members and friends to get involved. If your loved one goes to Bridge Club every Tuesday, you could see if there's someone in that Bridge Club that lives close by that could pick them up on the way. So you just kind of have to get creative about how we can overcome that roadblock. And the next roadblock is the stress of depression on the senior. I mentioned this earlier, but a recent study by the AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety revealed that older seniors that stop driving might be more likely to feel depressed. They also found that they're most likely to develop other health problems that their peers that remain on the road do not face. So giving up the keys almost doubles the risk of depression. So we want to make sure that we're still getting the senior out and about and interacting with their community. And researchers believe that this social isolation or lack of independence can occur when they are no longer able to get around on their own. So again, to avoid this, we need to have a plan in place before we take away the keys to help the senior stay connected. And then finally, the third roadblock is the guilt. I talk to so many families who say, well, Mom's going to be so mad at me if I take away the keys. And I've seen situations where the senior will stop talking to the adult child because they took away the keys. But we need to remind ourselves that it is a good decision in a lot of cases, especially if the senior is no longer safe on the road, to limit or take away the driving abilities for the senior. And again, these family members can feel really guilty about this, but we need to recommend to families that we need to remind seniors that is really, we have their best interest in mind. We're not doing this because we want to take away their abilities. We want to remind them that it is really, at the end of the day, we're concerned about them and we're concerned about their safety. All right, so let's talk about 5 more ways that we can help families on the next slide. As professionals, I wanted to lay out some different ways that we can help get the conversation started for families. So first, we need to encourage families to get the facts first and then decide the best course of action. Taking away the keys should be, again, the last choice. An evaluation from a doctor or an occupational therapist can provide an objective third-party voice. A driving evaluation can be recommended by a medical professional, again, such as the physician, and there might be a driving rehabilitation program in your local community or a program through your DMV where the senior can be evaluated. I know in my local community, we have a driver rehab program at our local hospital, so physicians can recommend to the senior or write them a prescription to go to this driving clinic where they have to take an assessment in the clinic where they have a set of pedals. I've actually gone and done it. It's kind of fun. It tests your reaction time. And then if they pass that in-clinic evaluation, then they will take them out on the road and do a driving evaluation. So those types of options, if you have them available in your community, really takes the blame off of the family, takes them out of the situation, and then the final decision is left to a professional. And another way we can help is to recommend resources, of course, just like the one I talked about, a driver rehabilitation program, a physician, an occupational therapist. And I'm going to give you a whole list of resources at the end of the presentation. But another one specifically that I wanted to highlight is the Car Fit program. And it's really neat. It's an educational program created by the American Society on Aging in collaboration with AAA, AARP, and the American Occupational Therapy Association. And this Car Fit program is designed to help older adults find out how well their current car fits their driving abilities. And it highlights actions that they can take to improve the proper fit. So just to give you a few examples quick of the suggestions that they make is knowing how to properly adjust the mirrors in the car to help prevent blind spots. So again, just making sure we make little adjustments or having suggestions on the adjustments we can make to make sure that the senior can see out of those mirrors properly and reduce those blind spots. And then another one is the best foot positioning on the gas and brake pedals. So again, this Car Fit program is really neat, and again, I'll have that information at the end of the presentation. The third way we can help families is discuss conversation starters and strategies for talking with an older adult. Think about giving up your lifelong habit of driving and what that can mean for your life. the self-esteem of the older adult could suffer if they're no longer able to drive. And families can remind the loved one, again, that he or she didn't lose their ability to drive because somebody took it away from them, because somebody stole their privilege to drive, but rather it's the changes that they're experiencing from their disease or their condition or general aging that's making it no longer safe for them. So I'll have some more conversation starters here in a little bit that we can use for families. But number 4 is include the senior in the conversation and in the solution. And I talk about this a lot. It's really important that the senior is part of the conversation, because if they're part of the conversation, they're going to be more invested in the solution. So once a senior accepts the changes in their driving routine, it's really important to also include them in the plan for how they're going to get around. And when talking with the senior, you might be surprised that they are very willing to admit that driving, maybe something like driving at night, is no longer comfortable for them. So they've already started to reduce their driving at night or have stopped altogether. So if we just talk to the senior and find out how they feel about driving, how comfortable they are behind the wheel, it usually leads to a good conversation. And then finally, we can encourage families to put a plan in place before taking away the keys. I've talked about this a lot, but unless the older adult poses an immediate danger to him or herself, the family shouldn't encourage the older adult to give up driving altogether. They can still drive, but in the meantime, you need to be coming up with a plan of alternatives to help them feel confident that if they have to give up their keys, they are still going to be independent. They're still going to be able to get where they want to go and where they need to go safely and punctually. So I know I've talked about conversation starters. I wanted to show you a few of them here on the next slide. So these conversation starters and many more can be found on letstalkaboutdriving.com. It's listed right up there towards the top of the slide. And these are great ways for families to broach the conversation about driving. And on the slide, we just have a few examples. And again, there's many more at letstalkaboutdriving.com. So, these are some simple ways for families to get the conversation started. So you could say to the senior, have the family talk to the senior loved one, say, hey, Mom or Dad, where are you headed this week? What does your schedule look like? Is there anywhere that I could take you, or is there a friend that could come by and pick you up on the way? Or bringing up the fact, the doctor's office moved a little farther. Maybe we should look into alternate types of transportation. That way you don't have to cross the major intersection or get on the interstate to get to that location. So again, go to letstalkaboutdriving.com for some more great conversation starters. And I've been talking a lot about all of these great resources, so I wanted to show you them here on the next slide. Again, there's letstalkaboutdriving.com. There's also a great driving evaluation through the American Occupational Therapy Association. You can see that on the second bullet point. There's the website there. The AAA Foundation has some great resources, such as a self-rating tool, a driver improvement course for seniors. It's kind of an online course that they can take, and the Older and Wiser Driver course. So those last 3 bullets are resources from the AAA Foundation. So visit those websites. And then on the next slide, I have even more resources. There were so many, I couldn't fit them all on one slide. So again, I've already talked about the CarFit program, and you can find that at carfit.org. And then the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, they have some good facts and figures on driving if you're looking for that. And the Bright Focus Foundation also has some great safety and older driving resources. And if you are a clinical professional, you're working in a clinical setting, there is a really great assessment tool. It's the 4th bullet point down, that website there, where you can download it and use that in your clinical practice to help start the conversation with the senior and really assess their driving abilities and their comfort level driving on the road. And then finally, A good book that was recommended to me was Driving with Confidence, and it's a practical guide to driving with low vision. So I know we talked a lot about how vision impacts our driving ability. So if you're working in the low vision clinic or with a lot of seniors that have the macular degeneration or the glaucoma, this might be a good book for you to look into, and you can find it on Amazon.com. And then, of course, the physician is always a great resource, and so can your local DMV be. And if you're in a situation where the senior is really stubborn, they're not going to give up the keys, you've tried to take away the keys, you try to take away the car, somehow they find a way to drive again. They go out and buy a new vehicle, or they take back their keys and drive anyway. Usually, the local DMV in your community should have an anonymous line where you can go and report a driver that you think is unsafe on the road. And I would say that would be, the last resort. Because, again, we talked about how seniors would most likely want to hear a recommendation about driving from a family member, a spouse, a physician, as opposed to authorities such as the police or the DMV. But we know that sometimes there's those really stubborn seniors out there that they're not going to listen to what we say and listen to what we do, so sometimes you do have to get authorities involved. And again, you can do that through your local DMV. So I've covered a lot of information, and usually around this topic there's a lot of great questions. So on the next slide here, we'll open it up for some questions. And Steve, I'll let you take it away.
All right. Thanks very much, Lakelyn. Lots of great information as always. And yes, it is time for the question and answer portion of today's webinar. So everyone, text in those questions. Let's get to it right here. Lakelyn, got a situation here. I have a senior who is experiencing beginning stages of dementia, is paralyzed on one side due to a stroke, using meds that impair his judgment. He has no family and refuses to speak with me regarding his driving. He changed doctors so he could be approved to get his license returned, and the DMV did so, but he is a danger, forgetting where he was going, running over curbs, driving aggressively, etc. Any suggestions for this very tough situation?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is tough. I've heard of situations that are very similar where people will fire, quote unquote, fire their physician for recommending that they need to give up driving, and they will find another physician. And that's unfortunate that he doesn't have any family around, and it seems like he is not open to other forms of transportation. In this case, it sounds like, he's gone to another physician, the DMV has approved him. If there is a hotline where you can report unsafe drivers on the road, in this case it sounds kind of like a last resort scenario. So that might be the best option for this individual to keep not only him safe, but most importantly, other drivers safe on the road, because it sounds like he's driving unsafely if he's driving up on curves and swerving in and out of lanes, that he could pose a danger to others. So I would say probably in this case, reporting him as an unsafe driver to the DMV would hopefully trigger another evaluation for him in his driving abilities.
Okay. Next question here. The anonymous senior driving report, we're talking about that. How does one come to assess one's driving ability without the resident being offended?
Will you say that again?
Sure. You're talking about the anonymous senior driving report. How do you go about assessing a person's driving ability without that resident becoming offended?
That's a good question. I usually, when I'm trying to assess a senior's driving abilities, will start to ask them some kind of general questions. Are you still driving? Okay, great. Can you tell me where you like to go, or where are the places you go most frequently? Then you could ask them, do you feel comfortable driving at night? Kind of assess the situations that they drive in and talk to them about their comfort level. You could ask them, how safe do you feel when you're driving? I would hope that they wouldn't feel offended by these types of kind of curious questions. If there's the opportunity to ride along with them in any situation, that would be another good way to assess their driving capabilities without having to ask them. You can more so observe them. And if the senior is offended by the question, I think it's appropriate, kind of let him calm down and try to reapproach the situation at a later date, especially if they're driving, if they're not, we've talked a lot about this, if they're not posing an absolute, they're not an absolute danger to themselves, they can still drive a little bit, then I would let them cool down. I would come back to it at a later date. You could refer them to the physician or ask the physician to inquire about their driving. But I think those little inquisitive type questions in a more casual conversational setting would be a good way to start the conversation around their driving abilities and how comfortable they are on the road.
All right, next question. We're finding that local doctors don't want to do anything about taking the keys away. They place this back on the families. How do you handle this situation?
That is tough because I've just said, blame the physician, have the physician take the blame for it. So if the physicians are out there and they're not comfortable making that recommendation, perhaps they could recommend a driving rehabilitation type program or go through like the local DMV to have an evaluation done. That's unfortunate that the physicians aren't wanting to get involved in the driving because that is definitely a safety hazard. If they are taking any sort of medications, I think it's important that you at least talk to the physician about how those medications could be affecting the driving abilities, because that could be one way that the physician could start the conversation around driving and at least let the family know if there are any side effects of the medications that they're taking that would affect their driving ability. It's unfortunate that they don't feel that that is an important part of the service that they offer. But I did give that resource on the last slide for clinicians, a driving evaluation. So you could, if you are a clinician, download that. You could possibly even bring that with you to the doctor's appointment and just share it with them. And maybe you can be the one to help educate them on ways that they can assess seniors and their driving abilities.
All right, next question. Are there any illnesses or medications that, if reported to the DMV, will prohibit seniors from driving?
That is a good question. I do not know about that. If anyone out there knows of a website, I know we've had some people in the past chime in with resources. I don't know that there's a specific list, but definitely check with the pharmacist if a new medication is prescribed to see if it could have any effects on driving. I don't know if there's a list out there that bans people who are on those medications from driving altogether. But again, your pharmacist would be the best resource in terms of that type of information.
Right, and speaking of information, we have not really a question here, but a resource here. Someone wrote in and said, Beyond Driving with Dignity by Matt Gerwell, a retired highway patrolman who started KeepingUsSafe.com. I'm kind of assuming that that's a book. Again, the title is Beyond Driving with Dignity by Matt Gerwell, Gurwell. If you want to check that out, just a little FYI.
Great resource. I'll have to look that up.
Lakelyn, next question for you. Driving is a privilege. It's not a right. How do we get entitled seniors to accept this?
Yes, that is hard. That is very hard. Pardon me. I would say you would have to approach it from a safety perspective, taking the blame off of them and onto yourself. So if you're a family member and you are trying to convince your loved one to stop driving, sometimes, not always, sometimes it's effective for the family member to say, Mom and Dad, it's not your, it would put my mind at ease if you would stop driving, maybe start with at night, because maybe you have some vision problems and the conditions of the road aren't as great at night, and it would really just put my mind at ease if you would stop driving at night. So not taking away the privilege altogether, but kind of starting small. And that, of course, that's not always ideal. It's not always practical, but it's a way to start the conversation. And if the adult child can put the blame on themselves, coming from a place where I'm just very concerned about your safety, we want to make sure that you are safe when you're on the road. So, if there are times of the day or night, or maybe you can just not drive during rush hour, those types of things. So sometimes you have to start small to get the conversation started, to get them to start accepting that driving is no longer safe for them. But again, having a plan in place is really important. And again, let's talk about driving.com. There are some suggestions for easing the transition from driving to not driving for seniors. So again, I would go back to let's talk about driving.com and take a look at those suggestions. If you go to let's talk about driving.com, if you go to the articles tab, there's some great articles there, and one of them is about that transition. So that could be very helpful for this family or for this senior situation.
Okay, and we've had a couple people write in with some comments on what we've been talking about here. Seizure disorders specifically. You cannot drive for 6 months if you have had a seizure disorder. Once you've been free of seizures for 6 months, at least you can then drive again. So just an FYI.
Great, yes, I do remember that now that they've said that. Okay, perfect.
Yeah. Also, another suggestion, most medications list on the bottle if it affects your driving abilities. So FYI on that too.
And that's why having a med reconciliation by a pharmacist could be so helpful for the senior in that situation, because as we know, seniors go to see multiple physicians. They don't always communicate as to what they're prescribing the senior, so they might have medications that are causing some side effects that are not conducive to the best driving conditions. So if the local pharmacy can do a med reconciliation, that is fantastic, or the physician. There's also a great med reconciliation system called Simple Meds, and you can find that at simplemedsrx.com. So, yes, make sure you pay attention to those labels on the medicine bottle. I know sometimes it's easy to just pick up the med and go on your merry way, but it's important to read all of the warnings and all of the side effects that are listed there.
All right, good to know. Next question here for you, Lakelyn. Situation here, what if you make an anonymous report to the DMV, nothing happens, what's your next step?
That's a tough question. Sometimes government organizations take a little while to process claims such as that. If it gets to a point where the senior is absolutely not safe, they're not listening to any suggestions, you've tried every avenue, there's always the option to call 911. Again, I would say I always resort to that at the very last. If you can physically take the car and the keys out of the living environment, again, those are some last resort options. We want to make sure that the senior is included as much as possible in this decision making, but as we've been talking about, there are some seniors that are so stubborn, and they might not be aware that their physical, their cognitive abilities have declined to the point where they're no longer safe on the road. So, again, very last resort, get the authorities involved or if you have the option to take away the car and the keys altogether. The senior might not be happy with you, might not talk to you for a few days, but at the end of the day, it is in their best interest to keep them safe and other drivers safe on the road.
Okay, another couple questions, or actually a couple suggestions here. New cars now have some great safety features that could keep them on the road longer if finances allow them to buy that new car. Also, someone wrote and said, some places you are not able to make the report anonymously. What would you do in a case like that, Lakelyn, if you live in an area where you can't make one anonymously?
Yeah, that is difficult. If the safety is truly of utmost concern, I would say still report it, even if it's not anonymously, even if the senior finds out who was the one that turned them in, because at the end of the day, it's about keeping the senior safe. Some communities, if they're more rural, small town, they might not have a local DMV where they can even report anonymously or not anonymously, and that might be a situation where you do get authorities involved, the local sheriff, something of that nature. I did want to go back to that comment made about the new technologies in vehicles, and on Let's Talk About Driving.com, there's some great ones. The smart headlights, the one that turn on at night automatically or kind of turn with the curves of the road. There's also the emergency response systems, the OnStar type, and then blind spot warnings. I don't know if you've been in a new car that when another car is passing, there's a beeping noise. So the individual knows, oh, I can't pass now. There's a car passing by me. And then some of them even have the assistive parking systems where they can park themselves, or the drowsy driver alerts. So those are some great new technologies. And again, like whoever mentioned that, thank you. If the senior can afford it, those might be some good technologies that they can upgrade in their car. And that CarFit program, the carfit.org that I mentioned earlier, they have some suggestions that don't necessarily suggest that the senior purchases a new vehicle. It's little adjustments you can make to your own car the way it is now.
Okay, Lakelyn, what recommendations would you have for discussing with families of those with loved ones with Alzheimer's or dementia diagnosis? As an administrator for an Alzheimer's assisted living, we've had several families that come to us looking for placement, but have not yet actually spoken with them about not driving.
That's a great question. helpforalzheimersfamilies.com. If you go to that site and search driving, there are some great resources on there that address that. So I would have you visit helpforalzheimersfamilies.com. And then, again, Let's Talk About Driving.com has some resources on there about the conversation as well. And the Alzheimer's Association, they always have some great resources around driving too. So if you contact your local Alzheimer's Association or go to their website, they have some great resources as well.
Right. Well, Lakelyn, we have just about reached the end of our hour here, and we're just about out of time, unfortunately, but I want to thank you for joining us today and for presenting. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thanks to everyone who joined.